Hello friends, this is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming and welcome to a Path of Exile build guide. In this guide I'm going to go over what Whispering Ice is, the changes to its unique skill Ice Storm, where to get the Whispering Ice so it is solo self-found viable, very easy to set up this build even if you're playing solo self-found, which class and ascendancy to choose for the build. There's actually a lot of options. Leveling and gearing. I'm going to go over the skill tree, the links that might be best to use for this, and in the end I'll go over an overview. So I hope you do enjoy this, and let's jump into the introduction. Alright, so Whispering Ice. Whispering Ice is a unique staff that you can start using at level 33. It actually provides a skill that's not normally able to be gotten by a skill gem called Ice Storm, which scales its damage based on how much intelligence you have. So this will be an intelligence scaling build, and the interesting thing about it is supported by all of the support gems that are in the sockets in it, regardless of whether or not they're linked. So you can make a 7 link functionally with just the Whispering Ice, or you can have a 6 link with a secondary skill using the cast while channeling, which is what we're going to be doing for the purpose of this build particularly. Recently, there were some changes to Ice Storm, the skill you get from Whispering Ice. In 3.6, it had its cast time reduced from 1 second to 0.75 seconds, and now it has a 6% chance to crit, up from 5% rather, which gives it a lot more power, a little bit more scaling and viability with that crit chance and crit multi scaling, and I think it is much more powerful than previously. So it is going to be something that we are going to be building around entirely, and let's get into the where to get Whispering Ice. Whispering Ice is able to be attained via the Incantation, which is a divination card you can get from Burial Chambers, Spider Forest, and the Western Forest. You can do it while you're leveling. You're able to go into the Western Forest and farm for it, but it is going to take a little bit longer. The maps, however, it is great for a second character because it allows you to get onto the maps with your first character, maybe a Holy Flame Totem or a Bane build, something powerful like that. And you're able to farm up these cards. They drop like candy if you have high quantity, so you're able to get them very quickly. And your goal is to get a Whispering Ice specifically that has a high percent increased intelligence. I would shoot for 17 or 18. Alternatively, you can purchase one. They're very cheap because of how easily they drop, and they're also dropped by another divination card, the Siren, but it does drop them corrupted. So if they're not 6-socketed, you can't really socket or link them together without using the crafting bench, which requires a lot of jeweler's orbs, a lot of fusing orbs. I wouldn't recommend going that route. We do kind of like the block chance as well. It is a nice little defensive mechanic. Of course, there are some great corrupts you can get, but it is kind of a crapshoot, so I wouldn't recommend that. So that is where you get Whispering Ice. Next, I'm going to discuss the ascendancies that you can choose and the classes that you can choose for the build. Alright, so as far as ascendancies go, I'm going to start with the one I chose, and it may not be the most popular choice, but I really enjoy it. It is the Templar Inquisitor, and the main reasoning for this is Inevitable Judgment, which allows you to critically strike and ignore enemy monster elemental resistance, which is an actually pretty great more multiplier on your damage, especially against bosses that tend to have relatively high resistances. So that's the main reason. Also, the Consecrated Ground is a pretty great defensive mechanic and makes it so you don't have to worry about mana regeneration. The way I build this is first ascendancy, 2 ways. If you want to go safe, you can go into Sanctuary first, which will give you the Consecrated Ground, which gives you 6% health regeneration, as well as the increased damage taken to enemies, and you get 15 flat mana regeneration per second while on Consecrated Ground, which will greatly reduce the mana issues you run into. If you want to go a little bit more damagey, you can start with Righteous Providence. Righteous Providence will give you all sorts of critical strike related effects. Because you're critting, you're going to be giving elemental ailments to your enemies pretty quickly, and if you don't, then you get that 100% increased crit chance, which is 6% because of Ice Storm's new scaling, and that is quite strong. Now, Inevitable Judgment will be the second one you go into in that case. Otherwise, if you started with Sanctuary, you go Sanctuary, Righteous Providence, Inevitable Judgment, so you get this either second or third. Once you do get Inevitable Judgment, if you have good crit scaling, you're going to notice a very drastic increase in damage. And then lastly, I like to go Augury of Penitence. Alternatively, you can go Pious Path. I don't really think that's the greatest idea, and I use Flame Dash, so we're not using any attacks. If we were using Shield Charge, maybe the Instruments of Virtue would be the way to go, but honestly, I think that I prefer the Augury of Penitence. Alright, the next one I want to talk about is the Witch Elementalist, which is great for one specific reason, and that's Paragon of Calamity, which makes it so you can't take reflected elemental damage. One of the biggest weaknesses of this build is that it can't run Elemental Reflect in the endgame on maps. So in order to be able to run that mod, we simply take Paragon of Calamity. There's also a couple of really great ones. Pendulum of Destruction gives a lot of elemental damage and AoE, both of which greatly improve the build. So I would start with Pendulum of Destruction, go to Paragon of Calamity. You can use Mastermind of Discord. Since we're going to be using, in this specific build, I like to use Herald of Ice and Hatred, and because of that, we will get greatly reduced reservation of the mana of Herald of Ice, which allows us to actually run Mind Over Matter in the end game, which is pretty nice. I do spec out of that in the end game generally speaking, but we can continue to run that. And then we can take Shaper of Desolation. You can also choose to take Liege of the Primordial as well if you want to run double Golem, maybe a Fire and Ice Golem. Either one's up to you, and you get the increased buff effect from the Golem as well. So pretty good options. The Elementalist is another great one you can do, and it opens up an entirely new endgame for you. The next class is more of a defensive one. It's also going to be a witch, and it's going to be the Occultist. Now, the Occultist gives a couple of interesting things. First of all, if you're going to go Chaos Inoculation, it's definitely an option worth considering because of Wicked Ward and Vile Bastion. So you'll get a lot of Energy Shield and Energy Shield synergies right from the start. I really like Forbidden Power as well, which will give you increased AoE and spell damage based on your power charges, and you'll get a power charge after spending 200 mana, which makes power charge regeneration in this build a lot easier. You don't have to use power charge on crit with either Ball Lightning or some other way to proc it. You can also put that on one of your heralds maybe. Void Beacon is an option. Otherwise, you can also go Profane Bloom, which gives you the cursed enemies you or your minions kill have 25% chance to explode. That's an option as well if you're going to be using a lot of curses in the build. I personally might just go with the -20 cold resist and go Void Beacon here, but there's a lot of different options, and Occultist is definitely worth taking a look at if you want to run this build. Alright, the next one is Trickster, which is of course a very popular build at the moment, and one of the reasons I like it most, there are two reasons. We are going to be doing a little bit of damage conversion, which I'll talk about later, which goes nicely with Harness the Void, which allows you to convert even more of your damage. Also Swift Killer, which gives you +1 to maximum frenzy and power charges, and gives you a chance to gain frenzy and power charge on kill. Gives a bunch of damage based on your frenzy and power charges. This one's actually pretty crazy, and we're going to be using a cast while channeling, most likely, so you'll gain a power charge or frenzy charge each second while channeling. That's actually quite insane. You're always going to have your power charges and frenzy charges up. Swift Killer is really very powerful for this. And then you can either go Ghost Dance and Escape Artist if you want to go for the Evasion Energy Shield hybrid build, Otherwise, you might want to, depending if you're going straight life based or straight energy shield based, get Patient Reaper, even though we don't get a lot of the damage over time, so that's a big waste there. We do get a lot of the regen, which really makes it nice for mapping. You can also do Weave the Arcane, but I personally like to use Flame Dash to proc my Arcane Surge. So I think Weave the Arcane has anti-synergy with that. So I would go in this order. I would go Swift Killer first, Harness the Void, Ghost Dance, and then either Patient Reaper, Weave the Arcane, or Escape Artist, depending on your preference. So there's a lot of different things Trickster can do. It's one of the highest damage builds. It frees up some slots, and it's a really nice one to do. It gives you some very interesting defensive options. Also with the Shadow, you could go with an Assassin, which is pure crit based, and that really gives you the option to get a lot of power charges. You get an additional power charge through this. We're already going to be, in my particular build, stacking a boatload, an absolute boatload of critical strike multiplier. So more crit multi is nice, more base crit is nice. You're pretty much going to be guaranteed, even if you do decide to reduce your crit chance with controlled destruction, you're still going to end up with an insane maybe 60, 70, 80% crit chance by the end of the build. So Deadly Infusion is very powerful. I would rush straight to that. And then, of course, we have Opportunistic, which makes it so we don't take reflect damage from crit strikes, which is very, very important. We don't kill ourselves. If we're almost always critting, we're going to take very little reflect damage. So Opportunistic is very nice, allows us to run those reflect maps. And then lastly, we can do Ambush and Assassinate, which gives a nice little bonus to crit chance, if depending on our opponent's life, and gives our crit strikes Culling Strike, which is really great against bosses. Very powerful there. Assassin's very strong, doesn't really offer a lot of defensive utility, which this build is lacking in though, so I would only recommend this for softcore. I mean, Whispering Ice is best in softcore in my opinion anyway, but I would definitely only attempt an Assassin on softcore. Alright, lastly we have the Ascendant, and personally for the Ascendant I like the idea of going Trickster and the Elementalist, so I would prefer to take Elementalist first. This will give you damage penetration for the enemy elemental resistances, will eliminate reflect damage, which is a huge one, give you increased herald effect, make your shocks always do a minimum of 10% increased damage, and give you that second golem if you want to do that. And then of course the Trickster gives you the frenzy and power charge generation on kill, increased recovery rate of life, mana, and energy shield. Of course that'll only be by damage over time, likely unless you have some fire damage added on some way. You're not really going to get that. But the 15% chance to gain 50% of non-chaos damage with hits as extra chaos damage is going to be rather big. You can't be stunned if you haven't been hit recently. If you're clearing really fast, is going to be helpful. And then 15 mana regen per second if you haven't used if you have used a movement skill recently. So nice little mana regen boost. The power and frenzy charge generation is great, and the extra non-chaos damage with hits is very, very strong. So I would go with that build personally, but there's different ways you can build this as well, and you can go through the Ascendant and see if there's anything you would prefer. And that will be all of the ascendancies that I would personally choose. To go with Whispering Ice, you could probably do some other kind of off-meta weird things as well, but those are the ones I would pick personally. Alright, let's talk about leveling up. So starting leveling, you'll probably want to choose a nice leveling skill. Freeze Pulse is always nice. You can use Shock, you can use Explosive Trap, Frost Bomb, any combination of those will really get you going. If you want to take a look at a video that will tell you how to level a bit faster, you can check out my fast leveling guide. It's on the channel, and I'll leave it in the description below as well. So you'll want to get one of those skills, go all the way to the end of Act 1, and at level 12 you'll be able to get Storm Burst. Now Storm Burst is going to be the skill that I prefer to use personally as the cast while channeling skill with the Whispering Ice, but we're going to use that all the way up to level 38, even though you can start using Whispering Ice at level 33. The reasoning for that is that Ice Storm actually is quite the mana hog, so even with a bunch of rings, for instance, I was trying to use for a while I was leveling this up. Let me see if I can find a couple of the rings. My stash is a bit of a mess here. There you go. I was using a couple of Praxises, which still I was having a tough time maintaining my mana while I was leveling. So I would recommend just using Stormburst, probably in a 4-link, or maybe even in a Life Sprig up until you get to that level. Now, if you have a Life Sprig, it's great to use as soon as you're able to. I would also recommend Wanderlusts and that kind of thing for leveling uniques. And you'll go through, and once you hit level 38, you'll switch to your Whispering Ice. You'll try to have it 6-socketed. Hopefully from a previous character, you'll be able to have it 6-socketed at least. And you'll want at least a 3-link because you're going to need Stormburst and cast while channeling. I guess you technically only need it 2-linked, but I would recommend at least 3 links so you get some damage. 4-link is perfectly attainable, and any additional links you can get is just a bonus because Stormburst has an incredibly low mana cost. Even at a very high level in 5-link, it's only 13. I would also wait until you get your first Ascendancy. In this case, if you have Sanctuary, you're never going to have any mana problems whatsoever because of the flat mana regeneration. Plus, if you helped the Bandit Alira, which I would highly recommend, you'll be able to get the flat 5 mana regen along with a nice amount of crit multi and some all resist as well. So in terms of where you're going to be going, it depends which class you started with, but generally you're just wanting to go through with the elemental damage, as much elemental damage or spell damage as you can. So in this case you would go through here. Cast speed isn't all that important because cast while channeling is going to limit how often you cast Ice Storm anyway. At the later game it's 0.36, I believe it goes down to 0.35 by the end. It starts out as something like 0.44, so a little more than 2 per second. And you're going to be doing a lot of your damage just with the Stormburst for a long time anyway, until you get a whole lot of intelligence, easily over 500 before you start noticing your Ice Storm doing any more than supplemental damage anyway. In the case of Shadow, you'll go through this elemental damage type thing. Then you want to get your life and your area of effect. There's area of effect in all 3 of the starting trees here. It's a little bit more difficult to decide where to go for the most part when you're playing Scion. You might have to go out through like mana or life regen, or in this case the spell damage. Maybe you just go out the spell damage side, get your Shadow and Witch nodes, and then kind of make your way over. You're not going to worry too much about the crit multi ones. The great thing about running Whispering Ice is you get access to some of the really nice crit multi nodes that are available if you're using a staff. And I would also recommend while leveling using Mind Over Matter and all the way back into Inspiration. I think this is going to be very powerful just because it gives you a big defensive boost in the leveling process. You're probably going to be squishy because you don't get too much life throughout all of these nodes. And I would just try to set up your tree more or less like this, so you get as much crit multi, and area of effect, a lot of life if you can get it, and try to work your way through that way. Very powerful. You might not need as much mana regen as I have. In fact, I can probably spec out of some of these. I'm only getting this because of the intelligence. And yeah, once you get to level 16, a nice one is to get his Perandus Blazon, which gives you 30 to all attributes. Makes it easy to level up something like your Ice Bite. You might want to use Hatred for a while. I personally like Hatred because you'll get the additional damage scaling from Stormburst, which starts out as physical damage, so you'll get a nice amount of cold damage added on there, and then you actually get more cold damage. So Hatred was changed to not only give you the additional physical damage as extra cold damage, but it gives you a more damage multiplier to your cold damage, which both your Stormburst with the Hatred and with the Ice Bite can scale off of, as well as your Whispering Ice's Ice Storm ability. So that's very, very powerful as well. I think that what I like to use is a Herald of Ice, which will often have linked with it Onslaught. So if your Herald of Ice kills something with its secondary effect, you'll get Onslaught for 8 seconds, which gives you more movement speed and more cast speed. Just makes it a little bit better. And then you'll also want to use Hatred as well, which I think is the most powerful. Otherwise, you can also use... There's a variety of other support gems you can use. I believe... Let's see, let's go find that here. You could also use... You could also use Zealotry, which is also very powerful as it gives you the Consecrated Ground, gives you more spell damage, as well as increased critical spell critical strike chance. So that's another option you can use. But once you get everything set up, you'll start noticing your damage going up quite nicely once you start getting your ascendancy points filled out. It's pretty smooth leveling experience. It generally will be a little squishy until endgame when you get all of your defensive mechanisms set up, which is why I think Mind Over Matter is nice. I'd try to start getting a cast when damage taken Immortal Call set up pretty early if you can. And that is pretty much everything. Oh, except for one more thing. I do like to have Flame Dash with Arcane Surge and faster casting, just to make sure that we're getting Arcane Surge regularly for that additional extra spell damage. Okay, I'm going to talk about my gem link setups because I don't think I quite covered them thoroughly enough in the last one. So for the Whispering Ice, that's the most important one. We're going to make sure we get Stormburst with cast when channeling. The more links the better, but you can easily get by with a 3 or 4 link while leveling up. The next one I would put in is Ice Bite. It just makes it a lot easier to generate those frenzy charges to give you the more damage and the more additional cast speed with Stormburst. And then you can put the increased critical strikes. While leveling, I also actually use Power Charge on crit with that, and it allowed me to keep my power charges up without having to use Orb of Storms. If you're doing one of the ascendancies that can generate power charges naturally, or using a curse such as the Assassin's Mark, you don't really need to do that, but currently that's how I'm generating my power charges. I think the second most important link setup, oh yeah, and for my 6th one I'm using increased critical strikes, and I also have link Controlled Destruction. We have enough crit chance where Controlled Destruction, the 6% reduced crit chance on the actual skill on Whispering Ice, and the 6% reduced on Stormburst isn't that substantial. We're still maintaining a very, very high crit chance. In the case of Stormburst, we have 52%. In the case of the Ice Storm, we have 52% as well, so they're pretty even there. They're exactly even there. The other important ones I think you should have are Flame Dash, Arcane Surge, and faster casting, so that you get the Arcane Surge when you move, use your movement skill. It's 12% more spell damage and 12% increased cast speed. The cast speed is nice because it gets your Ice Storm started a little bit earlier. I always like having a cast when damage taken, Immortal Call, and increased duration. I'm currently using cast while damage taken, or when damage taken, level 7. That's about 1,000 damage, 1,003 specifically, before you'll proc the Immortal Call. It'll give you a little bit of increased buff duration, and then the increased duration will make it a little bit more powerful. If you have it leveled up to about there, it makes it so that it procs frequently, but not so frequently, so that the internal cooldown is gone when you need it. You want it to be from bigger hits. I would say maybe a quarter to a fifth of your health would be an appropriate place to set it, and then kind of set up a block by right-clicking it when it comes to level up, and that'll stop it from leveling up additionally. From there, you can pretty much link whenever you want. I would prefer to have Herald of Ice linked with Onslaught because I like having the Onslaught set up so that when Herald of Ice's explosion happens and actually kills an enemy, because we have a lot of scaling damage for that, we get the 8-second Onslaught, which gives the increased movement speed as well as cast speed. Very nice. And then Hatred and of course your Curse. You can use your power charge on crit if you can generate crits other ways to maybe link your curse to faster casting and increased AoE. That might be worthwhile. And other than that, you can play around with it. I do have a video that talks about some nice utility gem link setups that you could potentially use for this build, and I'll link that in the description below as well. All right, and we're going to finally go on to the items, the uniques themselves. All right, lastly, I want to talk about gearing. So firstly, you'll want the Whispering Ice, of course, and for this, you specifically want, much more important than the cast speed, as I said, we get a lot of that from the tree, just naturally going through, you know, pieces of the tree that give it, as well as things like the nimbleness, which will also give us crit chance and crit multi, so that'll give us a lot of cast speed. We'll get cast speed on coordination, we'll get cast speed on Arcanist Dominion, so there's a lot of free cast speed we get. We get some cast speed on Retribution and Light of Divinity as well, so we're going to get plenty of cast speed. We're not going to be wanting for that. So cast speed isn't important, but we want at least 17%, if not 18% on the Whispering Ice. You can keep farming your cards until you get that, or you can buy one that has 18% if you want to go that route. The second most important piece of gear, it is replaceable, but it is very powerful, is an Astromantis, which can roll in between 80 and 100 to all attributes, and then 10 to 16 all attributes as well. This is the biggest single piece of equipment that can give us intelligence. You can use this from level 20, so you can start using it really early on. It makes all of your gearing needs absolutely trivial. You'll have well more than enough attributes to equip literally anything while you're leveling up, so that's not going to be an issue. It is generally pretty expensive, especially in a new league, so you may have to avoid it. And it's also very rare, so chances are you won't have found one. If you did, congratulations. I like to use the Perandus Blazon for a very long time, but eventually I'll use the Elder item, Cyclopean Coil. This can be gotten from the Elder fight. It may have to be Yellow Elder or higher, but it is a fairly common drop in that, and that can give you in between 5 and 15% increased attributes, along with 60 to 80% increased maximum life. And because of the way we're going to be prioritizing our stats right here, generally speaking, it's going to go int, strength, and dexterity, so that's going to make it so that we can't be shocked and we can't be ignited. Now, we don't have an anti-freeze, but we can easily get that on our flask, which is fine. There's no way our dex is going to be higher than our intelligence. So we got shock resist, we got ignite resist, and then we get 1% increased damage per 5 of your lowest attribute. We end up getting almost 200 dexterity, so that's going to be fairly substantial. A nice amount of increased damage, lots of attributes. If possible, you want to get as close to 80 life and as close to 15 attributes. This is one I found myself, so I don't have the 15 attributes. I don't really want to divine it. I only have one divine at the moment because I was divining other things previously, but it is the upgrade from Perandus Blazon that you can get. Another unique I like to use, if we're going uniques, is Mask of the Stitch Demon. Now, you're not going to use this if you're playing an Energy Shield build or a Trickster, but for my particular ascendancy, this one's really nice because it gives life based on your intelligence instead. So I have over 800 intelligence. I'm getting 2 life for each. I'm sorry, I'm getting 1 life for each 2 intelligence, so I'm getting over 400 life from this chest, plus 22, oh, wrong one, plus I'll get the life regen for every 500 max energy shield I have, which is over 1500. That's 3% regen along with the consecrated ground that I get for being stationary. It's another 6%, plus I get a couple from the tree. I end up with 11 or 12% regen per second, which is really nice sustain, more than most life flasks. As you can see, I'm sitting here standing still with 554. It goes down to 246, but yeah, that's 11%, I believe. So that's fairly substantial, gives a lot of intelligence. It's going to be hard to get more intelligence than this. Now, you can replace it with a high intelligence, life, resist, helmet, definitely don't have to go for this, and you're not going to want to go for this if you're playing an energy shield build or a lot of other different builds. But in this particular one, I like Mask of the Stitch Demon. For the chest, there's a lot you can do, and I'm going to talk about a lot of them. I've always wanted to use Atziri's Splendor. It didn't really fit into a lot of my builds, so I'm using that. Gives me great sustain with the 100 life and mana on kill, and it gives a good chunk of life, all resist, and of course I get the bonus energy shield as well, which helps with the Mask of the Stitch Demon. But you can do Calm's Heart if you can get your links elsewhere. I have a bunch of extra gems in here, so I don't really need them. You can also use things such as, I'm just going to go through the wiki and talk about some different ones that you can use. I really like Chevron's Wrapping, of course, because if you are using Chevron's Wrapping, you can easily get Pain Attunement, and you can actually run an additional aura, which is very nice, and it gives more spell damage. If you're going to do a Pain Attunement low life build with the Chevrons, you're going to get way more damage than this. You're just going to absolutely crap out damage. It's going to be fantastic. If you have, you know, the Exalts to buy the Chevrons and the 6-link it, well, you don't even need the 6-link it. That's the best part. You can just buy the cheapest Chevrons, pop it on there, boom. You're going to get a low life, powerful build. You can also use Belly of the Beast. Going to give you a ton of life. Has some nice little synergies, and of course you can use something like Lightning Coil if you want. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. There's also the Lore Weave you can use, gives you some benefits. I mean, the extra resist is going to be nice. Having 80% potentially max resistance is going to be very, very good for that. Or sorry, up to 78, not 80. But 78, that's a nice little bonus amount of damage reduction you can get from Elemental, which has some synergies. You can always use Cloak of Defiance, so you don't have to spend the skill points on Mind over Matter, and that can be quite nice. Carcass Jack is a great choice because all of our skills scale from AoE. You get AoE damage and the actual AoE. Some people also find the extra gore to be satisfying. Impulsas, we're doing a lot of lightning damage with Stormburst. You're going to get those shocks. You're going to get the extra damage for your AoE clear as well. So that could be another nice choice. And that is pretty much it. Of course, the Atziri's Splendor I myself am using. You can also just use a rare chest. Other than that, you're going to want intelligence on all of your gear. So I have intelligence on my gloves, got intelligence on my boots, not a lot. Don't have intelligence on this, but I need it for the resists at the moment, and do have a good amount of cold damage on there, or at least some cold damage. Pretty much try to get intelligence on every piece of gear you can. That'll scale up your Whispering Ice's Ice Storm damage quite a lot. Gearing is kind of limited on this one because there are some essentials. If you're not going to use an Astromanus, get a Turquoise Amulet. You're going to want the dex for your Ice Bite and for your Hatred. So that will be very important. So get a Turquoise Amulet, try to get Intelligence, Life. You can get more crit multi that way as well, so you can potentially have, you know, just as high damage through that while also having more life if you've got a really good Turquoise Amulet. And you could also use an Onyx Amulet if you'd like as well. So lots of gearing options. It's a really fun build. I hope you enjoyed this build guide. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I will see you next time. Bye!